Now we're going to look at Section 4, Taft and Wilson. So our learning objectives are to describe how Taft lost the support of progressives. But first we need to look at how Taft became president. William Howard Taft was Theodore Roosevelt's hand-picked successor, and he won the election of 1908. So Roosevelt, becomes president in 1901 after McKinley is assassinated, finishes out McKinley's term, basically serves most of that term, and then Roosevelt runs again in 1904 and is reelected, but in 1908 he steps aside and he endorses William Howard Taft. He throws his support behind Taft, thinking Taft's going to carry forward his progressive agenda. Taft did not seek new reforms, but did support increasing the nation's forest reserves and creating the Department of Labor to enforce labor laws. But Taft lost the support of progressives after a bill that was originally intended to reduce tariffs actually ended up increasing them. The 16th Amendment allows the Congress to levy an income tax without apportioning it among the states or basing it on census results, and it was ratified on the 3rd of February 1913, and this is actually right towards the very end of Taft's term. Taft, like I said, won the 1908 election, lost the 1912 election. Now, normally, when we elect a president, now in modern times, the new president is sworn in on January 20th. That's the inauguration date. But originally, the inaugurations used to take place in March. So this is really, we're talking really within almost a month of Taft leaving the White House that the 16th Amendment was ratified. Taft also lost the support of conservationists after it came out that his Secretary of the Interior, Richard Ballinger, allowed the illegal sale of protected land in Alaska. When Gifford Pinchot accused Ballinger of sabotaging the government's conservation efforts, Taft fired Pinchot. Now, our learning objectives moving forward are to explain how the split in the Republican Party allowed Wilson to win the 1912 election, and to describe progressivism under Wilson and explain why it ended. So now we begin to look at the 1912 election. Dissatisfied with Taft's lack of reforms, Roosevelt decided to run again for president. Now, Roosevelt really becomes the first person to violate the third term concept, which is something that Washington had really kind of established this precedent of presidents not running for a third term. But Roosevelt goes against Washington's precedent, and he runs for a third term, challenging his hand-picked successor, William Howard Taft, for the Republican nomination. And ultimately, what happens is that Taft wins the Republican nomination. So with Roosevelt out, a new party is formed really around him, known as the Progressive, or actually it was the Progressive Party. They chose Roosevelt as their candidate, but the party was more commonly known as the Bull Moose Party. And he picked Hiram Johnson as his vice presidential nominee with the Progressive Party, or Bull Moose Party. And the party ends up splitting the Republican vote. And this split allows the Democratic candidate, Woodrow Wilson, to win the election. Now, Roosevelt actually did better in the general election than Taft did, but you got to remember that Roosevelt had the support of some Republicans, but if only one of them had been in the race, that would have had a much better shot. But with their vote fractured or split, it made it easy for Wilson to win the election. So Woodrow Wilson becomes president, and he proposed a new set of reforms known as the New Freedom. So Wilson's New Freedom set out to lower tariffs, reform banking, Strengthen antitrust legislation. In 1913, tariffs were lowered, but a graduated income tax was implemented to make up for lost revenue. Now, what that means, a graduated income tax means that as your income goes up, it's a progressive tax. So as your income goes up, you move into a higher tax bracket, and you pay a higher percentage of your income in taxes. The Federal Reserve Act was passed to prevent bank collapses, and the Clayton Antitrust Act clarified antitrust laws and made strikes, boycotts, and peaceful picketing legal. But with the United States joining the Allied forces in World War I, attention shifted from reforms to the war. Soon Americans lost interest with progressivism, and that's what really brings about the end of the progressive era. It's not that nobody cared about progressive reforms anymore, but kind of that momentum is lost. People began to shift their attention towards World War I in Europe, and never again was there as much focus as there had been on progressive reforms.